Hey all, Tom Moran here from Thomas Big Spiders. This episode we're going to be taking a look at a true hobby icon, the Brachypelma emilia, or Mexican redleg. I picked this one up way later than I probably should have. For many, many years, I would get a hard time from folks every time I talk about Brachypelma species. They're like, why don't you have a B emilia? It is an incredibly beloved species in the hobby. Well, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at mine. What I've been trying to do lately is revisit some of my quote-unquote beginner species, because I found that several of the videos for them are many years old. I know that many folks are coming onto my YouTube channel. They're looking for information for these guys and they want the most up-to-date info. And sometimes when they see something and it's like, all right, this was 2 or 3 years ago, what's happened since then? I like to give them a little more confidence, go, all right, you know what? Here's an update. Here they are now. So again, in these videos, I am going through some basic husbandry for them. But what I implore people to do, go back through, look at the earlier videos. So for example, I did 2 other videos on this species before. It was when she was moved originally from the little Matchbox container I had her into the larger cylinder I put her into, and then from that cylinder into the enclosure she was in right before we rehoused her in this video. So you can actually go track the spider all the way through, which I kind of like when people are able to do that, because they can see how I raise them all the way through. And sometimes there's little changes to how I keep them, and that all comes through. So just a heads up for folks really looking for the information on these guys to really do a thorough investigation into how I keep them. That's kind of the way to go about it. So enough of me talking. Let's take a look at an amazing spider, Brachypelma emilia. All right, continuing our streak of rehousing what are considered to be some of the best beginner species tarantulas. This time we're going to be doing Brachypelma emilia, or the Mexican redleg, a true hobby classic. I picked this one up in March of 2020. At the time, it was a fairly well-started sling. It was like 3/4 of an inch to an inch, or about 2.5 centimeters. And full disclosure, I have found, let me open this up so maybe Billy can get some shots of her. She's actually behaving herself today. I have found with the gab species, or Grammostola, Faunapelma, Brachypelma, that when they're little teeny tiny slings, they take forever to grow. But usually once they hit around the inch mark, the growth rate picks up a bit. And that was definitely the case with her. She grew very, very well. I originally moved her. I had her in a Matchbox or a Hot Wheels plastic container, which I don't use anymore. I use them for a little while. They work. They're just not for me, until she had a couple molts. And then in May of 2021, we moved her into an acrylic cylinder that was basically about 20 ounces or so. And she was in that one for a couple molts, and then it was time to rehouse her again. So we moved her again in May of 2022. This time we moved her into what she is in now, which is an 8x8x8 or 20x20x20 Exoterra Nano. At that point, she was around 3 inches or 8 centimeters. So again, the growth rate on this one has been pretty good, but again, I started with her a little bit larger. So for folks looking to raise up Brachypelma species, a Faunapelma species, or Grammostola species, most of them at least, just know that if you start with a teeny tiny one, it's going to take a little while for them to put on size. But usually once they hit that 1 inch mark, from there, they kind of take off. So what we're going to be putting her into today, if Billy backs off, I think she probably got some great shots of that one, is this here. Back up just a little bit so we can see it. This is a Tarantula Cribs large cuboid. They sent me this one to try out. I absolutely love the size of this one. It's very similar to the size of the Sterilite containers I use, but being about, I think it's 14 inches by 10 inches by 8 inches deep. So the Sterilite ones are a little more shallow, and I found that they're great for terrestrial ones or spiders that aren't really going to do any digging, but they're not particularly great for larger spiders that want to dig. This one here will definitely give us some space for the spider to dig in. Well ventilated, which I love. I got the extra ventilated, I got the not so extra ventilated top on it. I believe they make this one with 2 different tops. One has just the holes going around the side. The other one is completely filled in, which is awesome because that gives you a choice of how much ventilation you want. But there's a lot of cross ventilation. As you can see, it's just above the ground level. And then what I have in it is my mixture of peat, cocoa fire, wouldn't that be fun? Peat, cocoa fiber, and vermiculite. I had some moisture stuff on the bottom, and I put some drier stuff on top. And then once again, I let it sit for several weeks to dry out a bit, because this is a spider that is not particularly keen on having moist substrate. I don't mind the bottom, and as a sling, I kept part of the substrate moist. As a juvenile, I gave it a moist corner, kept the bottom a little bit moist. She didn't seem to care either way. But as adults, they can usually take it dry, or they usually prefer dry with a water dish. If the top is too wet, they'll sometimes hang out on the sides. And then I got a big piece of cork bark here, a little cork bark slab, made a little starter burrow underneath it. because I have found that this species will do some digging even through adulthood. And I've spoken to many different keepers over the course of the years of putting up some content with these guys in it. And a lot of them said, yeah, mine continue to do some burrowing even as an adult. So definitely burrowed as a sling. As you can see with this one here, as a juvenile, when I put it in here, it had a burrow behind this piece of cork bark. Now the cage, the enclosure is a little bit smaller, so it's not able to burrow the same. So I'm hoping if she still wants to burrow, she'll have the opportunity in the new one. And then, of course, we've got some sphagnum moss, green sphagnum moss. I'm not moistening it down. It doesn't need to be moistened down. We have some leaf litter, and her little water dish will be going right over in here. Now, for folks who don't want to spend, every time I do something featuring an expensive enclosure, I have people come on and go, that's not worth the money. But it comes down to the individual keeper. For some people, this is fantastic. If they don't have a larger collection, they want to have nicer enclosures, this is perfect. If you want to see something a little bit different, last week I rehoused a bee smithy, similar size spider, into basically one of these plastic cubes I get off of Amazon. So if you want a cheaper alternative, check that out. That involves, doing a little drilling, putting the hinges on everything, but you can have a very nice enclosure that way. It comes down to what you're willing to spend and what you're willing to put on your shelf. So again, I get it from both sides. I'll put them in something that's cheaper. People will go, that's disgusting. Put them in something more expensive. I'll put them in something more expensive. And then the cheap people will be like, that's a waste of money. So choose what works for you. Personally, love the size of it, love the appearance of it, love the dimensions of it, great ventilation, very nice enclosure for somebody who's willing to spend some extra money to get something that's pretty. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to stop talking for a minute. We're going to get this spider into the enclosure. This girl has been a bit of a pip in her life. A lot of times you read B. emilia, if Billy wants to close in on this, while I talk a bit about temperament. When you read about B. emilia, people talk about that they are very, very laid back as adults. Females are very quote unquote tame, tractable, which means handleable. Unfortunately, what I found is that with mine, it started off as a sling, very skittish, burrowed. As a juvenile and young adult, very, very skittish, would run and hide, didn't like to be out in the open very much, and not one that I would ever think about trying to handle. She has definitely calmed down a bit. With her last molt, which is wedged in the corner there, somebody's going to freak out about that. She actually calmed down quite a bit. But this still isn't a spider that I would sit there and put my hand in with her, because there's a very good chance she would probably bolt. And the idea is you want to keep the spider as safe as possible during rehousing. So I'm going to be using a catch cup to make sure that she isn't able to bolt off. If she gets underneath this piece of cork bark here, what we're going to do is just lift it out of the way and get her into the catch cup, which is simply limeade. They really, all joking aside, I can't tell you how many people try this because they see the bottles on here. And there's like a lot of fans of the blueberry one now. So it's really good. It is really good. And it makes a fantastic catch cup. Oh, somebody was asking me why it makes such a good catch cup. It's because of the fact that it's more rectangular. So this allows me to get into corners and stuff with it. So usually what will happen is if you have a round one, I used to use I don't have one up here right now. Where did my, oh, here we go. Excuse me, spider. I used to use a piece of tape, something like this size for a long, long time. And the problem is when you try to put this into a corner, it leaves a big space that the spider can get out of. This allows you to get into the corners a little bit better. You're going to be a good girl and make me look like an idiot? Might even be able to... Yeah. No. There we go. I was going to try to pick the whole thing up, but I can't really get a good grip on it. There we go. Whoop, 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 whoop. There we go. Let's point her towards this. And of course, she's going to go right up there. So what we're going to probably end up doing here, and this is what I like to do with rehousing, is I did make that starter burrow. So when we get her out and about into this enclosure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew this. We're going to take it off. We're going to let her go right out here. They like to squeeze into the smallest spot. Another reason I like this, makes it very convenient for the spider to go up there. Generally speaking, she's not going to go back into this open area. She's going to stay up here. So what we're going to do is take this off, direct it right in there, give her a little poke. Actually, we may direct her into the back of this. So what I'm going to do is put this on here. So she goes. There we go. Boop. Boop. Oh, God, we got to get some shots of her on that green. I love when they look naturalistic. And as you can see, now she is probably, oh gosh, she might be close to maybe 4.5 inches or so. So she is definitely adult size. This species gets to be about 5.5 inches total. So considering that I picked this one up in March of 2020 as a sling and she's now a young adult, that is really good growth rate for a brachy, even for one that started at 1 inch. So again, we talked about the temperament of these guys. Know that the smaller specimens can be a little bit skittish. Here, I can hold this for a second. Poor Billy's doing double duty here. Know that these smaller specimens can be skittish. Know that they can burrow earlier on. Know that you don't want to overdo it with moisture, but give them a moist corner or something to make sure that they have that moisture if they need it. Sometimes just keeping the bottom level of substrate moist when they're smaller helps a great deal. But as adults, they like it drier. And then understand that although you may read that these guys are a very, very laid back species, generally speaking, when you hear that about any of the Grammostola, Aphonopelma, or Brachypelma species, they are referring to the adults. I found this with just about every type that you can keep. Grammostola, Brachypelma, Aphonopelmas, they start off as slings and juveniles being very, very skittish. That's where you're going to get the behavior where they may run around a bit, where they may kick hairs. So you want to keep that in mind when you get it, but they usually grow out of it. And this girl here is already being a lot more laid back than she has been in the past, which is awesome. And then, of course, as we were talking about before, this would make a good beginner species. Well, we're going to go ahead and slide this. Oh, I just don't want her to get out. This would make a good beginner species for folks looking for it. They tend to be a little more difficult to come by these days. I think back in the days, a lot of them were being illegally or exported in. And nowadays, you have to look for somebody to raise slings of them. No, not great shots there, but unfortunately, we got to make sure the spider stays in. A lot of folks were getting wild-caught specimens. Nowadays, we have to wait for slings to come in, and they don't come in all that often. So when they do, they can be a little pricey, but they are totally worth it. So there we go, Brachypelma emilia, the Mexican redleg. Again, I'm going to tell people at the end of this video, I will put the other two videos. I have the one that I rehoused her, I believe, into the cylinder. I have the one where I rehoused her into the 8x8x8 enclosure. So if folks kind of want to see a history of how I raised this spider up, I would encourage you at the end of this video, click on those other ones. That'll give you some more details about their care. And you'll be able to watch the progression of this one as she grows up. But amazing spider, beautiful spider. So happy to finally have one in my collection. So again, at the end of this video, when I do my stupid little thing where I point over here at the videos, I'm going to put both of the other videos so people can check them out. Because again, I think there's some good information in there. Someday I might get around to taking some of these videos and kind of putting them all together in one massive long video so folks can see all the rehousings, all the care notes I've had for them. Maybe that's something to do down the road. But again, absolutely love this spider. So happy to finally have one. And I realized what I had been missing. I think the problem was I went through a period in the hobby when I first got into it where I was buying a lot of the quote unquote beginner species, a lot of new world specimens. Then I moved into old worlds, and sadly I was one of those folks that for a little while the new world seemed boring to me. Then I realized the error of my ways and came back, and I think I probably have more new worlds than old worlds. But this was one of the ones that it was a little pricey at the time. I kind of stayed away from it and then regretted it later on when I really, really wanted one. So now I have one. She's beautiful, and she's settling into her new enclosure great, new enclosure well. One thing I do want to see is whether she will continue to do any burrowing. I did notice it with this new enclosure. She kind of ran out of space for it. So I'm kind of hoping to see if she'll burrow. And that's something I've been doing with all of my quote unquote beginner species and new worlds I've been rehousing, giving them that extra depth in their enclosure. So if they want to burrow, they can. So I'll keep folks updated about that. So thanks so much for watching. You guys know the drill. If you're brand new to the channel and you want to check out more of my videos, you will find them over here. Unfortunately, today, all you're going to find is videos about this particular species. If you'd like to subscribe, you can click that little circle up there, and I do really appreciate it. If you take the time to comment, I'll take the time to respond. Just know it can take me a little while because I get busy. Guys, as always, stay safe. We'll catch you all next time.